Well, the Supreme Court really rallied quickly to the Colorado issue. Thoughts?
Yeah. Well, this is an astonishing decision. There are two concurring opinions that are really sort of dissents. The court went way beyond where it needed to go. The center part of this is the court said states may exercise discretion to deny people offices for state and local government because they were insurrectionists or they gave aid or comfort to insurrectionists, but cannot do so for federal office, Congress, Senate, the presidency. Okay, they all signed on to this. But then they went on and they planted something that could be a real time bomb down the road. They said that if Congress wants to prevent someone like Donald Trump from being on the ballot, they should pass enabling law, as mentioned in Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. Here's the trap in that. Right now, the 14th Amendment says you're entitled to due process of law. There is no specific statute that you rely on to say I was denied due process of law. The police just came and grabbed me. They didn't have a search warrant or anything else, and I didn't get due process of law. And what they're embedding in here is potentially a disaster for enforcing the 14th Amendment. And there are members of Congress, I've interviewed a few over the years, who want to repeal the 14th Amendment. I actually came pretty close to getting Senator or Congressman Ron Paul wants to want to repeal the 13th Amendment, which is what prohibits slavery. His contention was that the 13th, requiring you to fill out an income tax return, is a violation of the 13th Amendment. So I think this is very troubling. Now, the three liberal justices, Brown, Sotomayor, and Kagan, wrote a concurring opinion that there's a real slap in the face of the rest of the court. It opens up by saying, in essence, the court should only do what is necessary to resolve a case, and it should not do anything beyond that. And that's the issues I just talked about. They went way beyond this in creating new law, and they cited this word for word from the Dobbs decision, that the first ever Supreme Court decision to take away a right, in this case, a right of a woman to control her reproductive means. And they do a very good job of basically slapping around the other justices, saying you're creating new law. It has no basis in the Constitution. You shouldn't have gone there by your own standards. Amy Coney Barrett, the lightest weight of lightest weight people who've ever served on the court, wrote a one-page concurring opinion where she agreed with the idea that the five men had gone too far, but then she slaps around the three women, saying, we need to lower the temperature. I'm sorry, she voted for Dobbs. That raised the temperature in this country enormously. I mean, that is how she's not only not a good lawyer and not a good justice, but she's not even self-aware of what she's doing. I mean, it really should be an embarrassment to her to be on the Supreme Court.
Well, I also wanted to ask you just on that point, David, it's not really a justice's place to talk about the body politic or what, tumult might result as a decision or whatever. I mean, you're supposed to rule on the merits of this question.
That's right. It's absolutely correct. And that's the issue that the three women justices have brought up here. But this court group of five men, they are not paying any attention to that. They're trying to change the country. And, John Glover Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States, and by the way, the Chief Justice is always of the United States, not of the Supreme Court. John Glover Roberts, in his confirmation hearing, 20 years ago now, said that because there were concerns that he would be an activist judge. If you remember when Republicans complained about activist judges, he said, no, senators, I will only call balls and strikes. Well, this is the latest decision showing he lied. He hasn't been calling balls and strikes. He's been trying in various ways to create law. By the way, there's a wonderful comment here from Brian Jennings, I think it is. Kim G. No. Amy COVID Barrett, self-professed handmaid.
And she is. Yes. Well, if you're looking for smartass, you'll definitely find it in our chat. So our chat will never disappoint you. Yeah, the appointment of Amy Coney Barrett, of course, is bizarre and craziness in itself. The last minute insertion, essentially, of Amy Coney Barrett into the court.
And there's a very large number of competent, conservative, and even right wing, way out right wing judges who could have been chosen, not her. This was a choice to get, Donald always says, the best people. I only get the best people. No, this is the worst people.
Well, and I'll move on to Donald Trump in a second, although obviously this seems as though it was a decision crafted to address the Trump issue. I mean, in other words, he's getting his money's worth out of the Supreme Court.
Well, and so the Supreme Court acted very quickly on this matter of can he appear on the ballot or not, because ballots have to be printed. But they set a 54-day schedule for arguments in the insurrection case. And there's no need for that. By the way, if you
That's
go back
the immunity case, yes?
The immunity case, and where Donald Trump claims as president he has the right to murder people, which clearly he hasn't thought through, because Joe Biden, under that theory, could have him killed. The court was asked in the early December by Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, to take up the immunity claim of Trump. And instead, the court sent it to the Court of Appeals. We got a very solidly reasoned decision from that court by 3 women, none of them appointed by Trump or Biden. And the court could have just turned this down. Instead, the Supreme Court says, we'll hear it. Why do we need a 54-day delay? We'll have arguments for Mr. Trump in 10 days. Mr. Smith will have 10 days. And by the way, he always files 1 day later because they're ready to go and very competent. And then there'll be another 5 days. So we would have had 16 days. And this issue will be taken care of. And mark my words, when the court decides, likely in late June, if it decides at all, it may well send this back to either the trial court or the Court of Appeals for further proceedings, because all they're doing here, the 5 is, and maybe Amy Coney Barrett as well, is helping Donald Trump get past the November 5th deadline. And it is patently obvious. I mean, I've watched some conservatives saying this, some pro-Trumpers acknowledging this implicitly in what they're saying. So I think that it just should be obvious to everybody, and it is not what the Supreme Court's supposed to do. It's an example of the serious moral breakdown at the top of our country.
The cavalry of the Supreme Court has come to his rescue by expediting one decision, you're saying, and delaying the other, both deliberate to help Trump out.
Yeah,
it's
obvious.
Yeah. So, David, tell me about Trump himself and the body politic for a moment. He, continues to play the victim card. He's the aggrieved party. He's essentially the victim of political persecution. That's what these cases are all about. One case will come forward before the election. Of that, we're certain, yes?
Yes. Yeah, the March 25th trial, I don't see any way that's going to be stopped. That's the Stormy Daniels payoff. Now, if Trump is convicted, as I fully expect, he will have an obvious appeal. There are 34 misdemeanors. That's the transactions under which the hush money was paid. And there are checks and transmissions and plenty of evidence of that. But the way they made this a felony case is they said that the purpose of all these transactions was to steal the election by hiding the payoffs. And that's a federal law, not a state law. So you can be sure as soon as the jury comes back, Trump's lawyers will say, this doesn't hold up. So there won't be any immediate incarceration or anything else while that gets fought out. And it's possible that Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan district attorney, will lose that case. I urged him in a Sunday New York Daily News op-ed maybe a year ago to bring another case. Donald Trump created 6 fictitious businesses and either took losses with no revenue, or the revenue and the losses exactly matched to the penny, which is just that doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen to the penny. These are obviously fictitious, and because Donald Trump was tried twice for tax fraud, in 1992 over his 1984 tax returns, lost both cases. Now, these are civil fraud, not criminal. But the judges in both cases excoriated him for claiming he had a business with no revenue, no receipts, no records of any kind, but he took over $600,000 of deductions, which they disallowed. He can now easily be charged with and convicted of a felony for doing this 5 dozen times, including when he was president. And I don't know. I mean, that strikes me as there are no slam dunk convictions, but boy, that gets awful close. You'd have to really screw up the prosecution not to get a conviction. And there are many other crimes he's committed, Mark, that he'll never be prosecuted for.
Well, I mean, and I would love to, as I've said here before, just because it's so easy to understand for the media can't spin it. The documents case, it's really an espionage case, the jacking the documents. That seems to me like a layup, like a slam dunk, you know. But now he's essentially got a hench person in that judge.
Yes, and here's something that the news reporting has not done a very good job of pointing out. Jack Smith, the special prosecutor, in his filings in the Florida documents case, has cited all sorts of hypothetical examples. Well, what if a president of the United States were to have sold a secret about, and he named something specific? What if a president of the United States were to have gone to a terrorist organization or their front and obtained money for that secret? I mean, given that we know that Trump showed documents, there's audio tape in one case and testimony in another, at least twice to other people, that he went to great lengths to hide documents from his own lawyers and had his lawyers lie to the court. I wrote a piece in August of 22 saying Donald doesn't know anything about national security, but he knows value. And I think it's more than reasonable to think that Donald Trump either tried or has, in fact, sold out his country. It also can be that Jack Smith's office says we cannot bring a case for that because it would reveal the lives of valuable undercover assets or agents or American spies. We did have the incident where in May of 17, where Trump had been president for just 4 months, he invited unannounced the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, and a quote-unquote news photographer from TASS, which is the Soviet propaganda agency, to the Oval Office. We only know about the meeting because the Russians announced it with great glee. And shortly after this, 2 things happened. There was a state television, because that's the only television there is in Russia, showed a meeting going on in a government office when suddenly a bunch of burly guys in suits came in, threw a bag over the head of a guy and dragged him out of the room, never to be heard again. And national security reporters, using unnamed sources, to be clear, because that's how you do national security reporting, identified this guy as an American asset, somebody who was telling us stuff going on in the Kremlin. He's never been seen again by his family or anyone else, so presumably Putin had him shot. Right after that, stories appeared in the foreign press in which, as I remember, Australian, English, Dutch, and maybe Israeli as well, intelligence sources said, we're not going to share stuff like we used to with the American government because this guy Trump we can't trust. He will give away sources and methods. Sources and methods is how did we find this out and who found it out? And people get killed when you do that. And it was reliably reported by some long experienced and reliable national security reporters that the U.S. government set out on several, rapid missions to extract people before they could be killed. And I don't think in our lifetimes we're going to know the full story. Someday, hopefully, that story will be known. Remember, our government still keeps secrets from World War II and World War I because they're considered not safe to release.
It was such a high-profile meeting, as you say, unannounced, and it was, and I believe, was that the meeting, David, at which Trump excused everyone but the translator? He didn't want anybody there except the translator.
The Russian translator.
The Russian translator, right? It's so. God, if you'd put it in a movie, they would go, "Nah, that's just not believable." He
tried in 2015 to sell a movie about an American alleged billionaire who becomes president and sidles up to the Kremlin and denounces American intelligence agencies and meets alone with the dictator from Russia and says he's in love with the dictator in North Korea, and does nothing when an American journalist from the Washington Post is murdered and carved up in pieces so he can fit into suitcases. Nobody would buy that movie in Hollywood because they go, that's ridiculous. They think nothing like that can happen.
Right. Nobody's going to do that. Somebody would stop that. I mean, come on now. Right. I'm going to come back to something that's come up in the chat, which is about the expansion of the court in a second. But I just want to follow up on some other things that have come up in the chat. The stolen documents case is an espionage case, says Russ. Some highly classified documents are still missing. Why is the media not focusing on this? It is where the media is kind of a shiny object, kind of influenced entity, isn't it?
I can hear editors saying, that's inside baseball. It's too technical. We covered that. We reported that when it was filed. There is very much a once and done attitude in the news business that is terrible. If advertising worked that way, you would have seen Flo and the Gecko and Limu Emu once, and that would have been the end of it.
That's what a great way to put it. God, that's brilliant. You have to keep reporting these things. That it's has to be done doggedly. Absolutely right. Jack Smith. Go ahead.
Well, and most people, they don't understand the law. I get that. I understand that. So you just translate it into plain English. I mean, if you can translate as I have tax law and electricity pricing into plain English, you can take a prosecution and put it in plain English.
To your point about the examples that were picked, Brian says Jack Smith didn't pick fictitious examples. He knows Don did those things.
I think there's probably very good evidence the government has that Trump has already sold out our country. But, revealing that would give him the right to discovery. I mean, remember, one of the things that the judge, Elaine Cannon, who Trump appointed, is trying to do is force the disclosure of witnesses, their testimony, and national security documents, clearly in an effort to intimidate Jack Smith's office to not continue the case. She's as much of a traitor to America as Donald Trump.
This is an interesting, provocative notion. Vilma says Trump not only knows value, but Trump owes a lot of money. When Trump becomes Republican candidate for presidency, I believe Biden has to share information about national security. What I took her comment to mean, meaning the ways in which Trump has violated national security. I don't know. I suppose that, could that be leaked, David? I mean, it doesn't have to be Biden who announces it, but
I don't think Biden will do that directly, because that just turns into a political controversy about why is he revealing this. It can be gotten out there in various ways without Biden's hands on it, and frankly, without him having anything to do with it. But Vilma raises a really important issue that's going to come to a head a week from today. Donald has until March 12th to put up $83.3 million in the second E. Jean Carroll defamation case. That award is that size because the first award of $5 million wasn't enough to get Donald Trump to stop lying about her and defaming her. He's tried now to put up, $25 million, $26 million, and the very excellent attorney who represents E. Jean Carroll, the writer, has said no to the court. You've got to put up the whole amount of money. There's no special treatment here. And here's the thing you need to worry about. So Donald Trump needs $83.3 million in that case. He needs $454 million plus another $87,000 interest each day in the New York civil case. Because in appeals, the people who might put up a bond are going to want a margin above that, because Trump will fight ever paying off. You're really looking at $600 million or more. Donald doesn't have $600 million. I've said I don't think he has enough for the $83 million in cash, despite his testimony. But here's what could happen that's a national security nightmare. Donald Trump borrows that money, not from a bank, but from Peter Thiel, the billionaire, the Koch brothers, although they hate him. So the one Koch brothers surviving of the two big ones, he wouldn't do that. But what if he gets what's known in the trade as a back-to-back deal? And here's the way to think about that. Mark, your kids want from you $250,000 to start a business. You think it's a dumb idea. You willing to lose the $250,000, but you really don't want to have a fight with them about collecting. So you go to your banker and say, listen, I'm going to deposit $250,000 with you. There's a letter of credit here. You make the loan to my children of $250,000. If they flake out and don't pay, the loan is covered. You take the money out of my account. Now, apply that to $600 million, and the back-to-back is with a Russian oligarch. It's with part of Putin's criminal gang. It's with MBS, the murderous dictator in Saudi Arabia. It's with some scoundrel who's an American, or maybe a Russian American. We might not know about the back-to-back arrangement, and that's a real national nightmare. And by the way, remember, Donald Trump told us 9 years ago, I'm worth over $10 billion. Well, if you're worth over $10 billion, coming up with $600 million, even if you're in illiquid, that's an annoyance. It's not a horrible crisis. Donald's never been a billionaire since I first exposed him as not being a billionaire in 1990. But boy, people believe that. They believe it. A real billionaire is out hawking $399 tennis shoes, which, by the way, you can now get on eBay for only $99.
Wow. Thank God. Yo, that's great news. Yes, thank you.
There's never been anything like this.
Yeah.
Steaks and water and vodka and, and begging for donors to give him money to pay his lawyers.
Andrew's kind of a MAGA-ish guy. He says he'll put up his Truth Social stock as collateral for a bond. This Truth Social thing. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
That's already collapsing. The Truth Social thing, if you look at it, they had losses were something like 14 times revenue in the one of the two companies that would merge under this deal. And there's already been litigation claiming that the place is being looted. And there's no ad revenue of consequence there. It's not going to go anywhere. And nothing requires Donald Trump to do business. And he doesn't post there very much. He posts other places. So, just everything Donald does financially is tainted. And that's being really polite.
Last thing, as we just have to wrap up with you, you're so generous with your time every week. The expansion of the court is something that I'm seeing a lot in the chat. We talk about it a lot here on the show. I'm an advocate for expansion of the court. Can you speak to how you stand on it? If you can review how you feel about it, and also what's involved in expanding the court.
I've been an advocate of not only expanding the Supreme Court, but adding more federal judges, trial court judges, and more appeals court judges for years. The Chief Justice Roberts, in his annual reports, keeps continually saying we've got too many cases and not enough judges. And the numbers show that's right. And I think that the Supreme Court should be expanded to 15 or 17 members. Now, the Constitution allows any size court. We've had a 7-member court. Apparently, one time we had 8 for a while, which doesn't make sense when I have a number. But we should expand the Supreme Court. And we should take care to make sure we put reasonable, middle-of-the-road people on the court. I mean, if that happens and Joe Biden or another Democratic president who gets this appoints a bunch of judges on the left, that's not going to work. Even though that's what the right's been doing. Appoint judges who are going to be in the middle, and they're going to care about the country and its long term, not about their political biases. Pick people who are really smart, like Ms. Brown. She's clearly the smartest person on the court and the best versed and immersed in our Constitution. So but I would not go from 9 to 11. I would go to 15 or 17 members, maybe 13, but 15 or 17. One of the arguments against that is, well, we have to build a new Supreme Court building. Well, then build a new Supreme Court building. We'll move some of the judges back and go build a new one. I mean, since when did that stop anything?
Go ahead.
We really need about 25. We need about 100 to 200 more district court judges, and we need at least 25 appeals court judges, and maybe as many as 100.
So, what would be involved in actually doing that, David? What has to happen?
Congress. Real easy. Congress just passes a law. The Constitution says Congress, there shall be a Supreme Court and whatever other courts the Congress deems to create. In the very beginning of the country, there was one court, the Supreme Court. Justices rode circuit, that is horseback, and they went from place to place to conduct trials. The Supreme Court didn't even hear a case for a couple of years after the country was founded. But Congress just passes a law. It's as simple as that. We're now creating 6 more judges in Los Angeles and 3 in Minnesota, and there's one other reform. You shouldn't be able to go to a location to file a suit where there's only one judge. That's how we got some of the terrible women's reproductive rights cases. There's a judge in the Panhandle of Texas. He's the only judge. Judge Eileen Cannon in Palm Beach is the only judge. No, it's in the district, and you get whatever judge the random number generator spits out. We really got to put an end to that. Congress can do that as soon as we have one party that cares about democracy in both places, or the Republicans change and go back to being Republicans instead of Trump cultists.
It's a big wish list given the consistency of our politics right now. But David, love spending time with you. Thanks so much. Look forward to talking to you again and seeing your stuff, dcreport.org and across the Twitterverse and beyond. Thank you, David Cay Johnston. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.